I will open up the floor to questions in one moment, but I do have one question I would like to see if you could elaborate a little bit on the point you made about the institutions that are now acting within the US system, having seen now a number of different initiatives, including your own bill. Can you elaborate on what are the institutional checks and balances that we can still have some trust they will be able to withstand the current situation, and also the significance of this being a bipartisan initiative? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
You know, we in Congress are considered the Article I branch of the American government because of our Constitution. And we pride ourselves on the fact that our founding fathers and mothers said the first branch of government identified in the Constitution is going to be the branch that is the people's representatives, because we don't want a king, we don't want a sovereign. That's why we fought the revolution in the United States. And sometimes it's challenging with the partisanship that we're experiencing in the United States. It's challenging because the president has so controlled the Republican Party, the other party in Congress. But there are, as you would hear if the entire delegation that's here with us were here, you would hear that Republicans also understand that to undermine NATO, to destroy the transatlantic alliance, undermines the United States, it undermines our national security. And so anybody who's paying attention knows that that's not what we should be doing. We have elections this year. The fact that 86% of Americans are not favorable about what the president is talking about with respect to Greenland acts as a disincentive for members of Congress. The conventional wisdom, knock on wood as a Democrat, is that Congress is going to flip to Democratic hands, and that will have a check on what the president does. There is legislation that I've introduced. The other real check that we have in Congress is that we fund the government. And while President Trump has made a point of doing many things that he wants to do, regardless of what we in Congress say, through executive order, the courts have stepped in ways that have been significant to prevent certain actions. And we have the power of the purse. And we have put funding in for Ukraine that the president didn't support. We've put funding in for a whole range of programs. And so there is that also that acts as a check.
Midterm elections in November, but some time to go. If we look at what has happened just in 1 year, it seems like 1 week in politics is a long time, so a few months is certainly a long time for us to wait. I'm very happy to open up to questions from all of you. I am sure that there will be many. Can I ask you, there will be microphones circulating, I believe. Do we have microphones circulating? Yeah. Please state who you are, where you're from, as a representative from an organization, or as a citizen, or student, or and a brief question, please. If we take 3 questions at a time, is that?
Sure.
Yeah. No questions? That would be remarkable. Yeah. Can I go all the way at the back, please? Up there? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Anders. I'm a student here at KU studying history. I know you sort of broached the subject in regards to what you could actually do to prevent any action taken against Greenland. We just saw that no action was taken to prevent anything happening against Venezuela? And what is there to say that the same process won't happen to Greenland, that Trump sidesteps all the different normal avenues of starting a war and invading another country?
I'll be happy to take a few more questions if that's
Sure.
okay for you. So if we have the microphone can come here. Yeah. Thank you.
We don't have any young women raising your hands? Come on.
Hello, I'm Finn. I'm a student at KU, but I'm also a Dutch citizen. And the Secretary General of the NATO used to be our Prime Minister.
Right.
And I was wondering how you see his role in this. Do you think he should do more, or because he's been very quiet?
And the very last question here in the front, please.
Hi, my name is Daniel Tallman. I'm a journalist at the Danish newspaper Berlingske. This Trump's clear interest of Greenland seems to be a thing that just doesn't want to go away. So what would be your best advice for the Danish MFA and Prime Minister in handling Donald Trump?
A broad range of questions.
Yes. I'm just writing this down. As I said, it was a long night last night, so I want to make sure I don't forget. First of all, on Venezuela, while I appreciate that both Greenland and Venezuela are in the same hemisphere, Venezuela is a very different situation, I think. The president used as his motivation to go into Venezuela the fact that there was an indictment against Nicolas Maduro and his wife for their activity with drugs, with with terrorist organizations, with cartels in Latin America. And he also was an illegitimate president in Venezuela because, as I'm sure all of you followed his election, the last election in Venezuela, where he was overwhelmingly defeated by the Venezuelan people, and yet he refused to step aside because of that. So I think it's a very different situation because Greenland, as the Greenland Prime Minister Nielsen just told us, not just shares our values, but it also, the people of Greenland want to make sure that they determine their own futures, and they have elections. They are self-governing. So I think it's a different situation. Now, you ask about the Trump focus on Greenland. You know, part of me is not sure how much of this is a distraction to try and take the attention of the American people away from some very real issues that we have in the United States right now. The cost of living is a real concern for Americans. Donald Trump got elected saying he was going to address the cost of living, he was going to address domestic issues, he was going to end forever wars, and he's not done any of that. So people are frustrated with him. Also, as you may have followed the Epstein files, the pedophile in the U.S., who it's been quite an issue, particularly in the Republican Party and among Donald Trump's followers. And, you know, Trump is a master of having a problem over here and saying, oh no, don't pay attention to this problem, look over here at this shiny object that I want people to focus on. And so I don't know, who knows it's hard to know what Donald Trump's real motivation is. But I do think there is some of that going on in terms of the focus on Greenland. There's also the suggestion among some that he wants to be a president who expands the territory of the United States. Well, I think nobody in the United States, and certainly nobody in Greenland or Denmark, think that willingly giving over a sovereign nation to the United States is something that is in the interest of any of those three countries. So I think, to the Venezuela point, this is a really different situation. On Secretary General Rutte's role in this. What I'm hearing is that he's been working behind the scenes. As you know, a number of NATO countries are doing exercises in Greenland now and sending troops in. I think he's had a role in helping to make that happen. And certainly he helped to negotiate the 5% increase in GDP among NATO countries in a way that I think has strengthened NATO. So far I've been a fan of Secretary General Rutte. I think he's doing a good job. And as I said, as part of the Senate NATO Observer Group, we have been to the last 5 NATO summits. And I have only seen NATO get stronger. That, for me, is one reason I'm so troubled by the president's rhetoric, because I think it does undermine that trust, as I said in my remarks, that is required for that kind of a military alliance.
Very good. I think that there was a sense in the Danish media after the meeting the other day with J.D. Vance that, you know, this was the best possible outcome. We didn't see an escalation as a result of this meeting, and in fact there was an agreement to keep talking. That very quickly turned around, and I think it's a very new world for the Danish diplomacy, very experienced ministers
Right.
are showing up, and then things actually don't play by the book that we know. Can I ask you, before again I take another round of questions, what would be your advice and your take on what is to come, even in the next weeks? What rules can we play by?
Well, unfortunately, Donald Trump seems to have thrown out a lot of the rules of foreign policy, which is frustrating to so many of us in Congress, and unfortunately to many members of his own party who will talk about that behind closed doors but are reluctant to stand up to him. But your ambassador to the United States has been very effective at meeting with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, talking about the situation and about how to move forward. Yesterday, a number of us on the Foreign Relations Committee met with your Foreign Minister, Rasmussen, and with the Foreign Minister of Greenland to talk about the situation and what we could do going forward, how we could keep the focus on the importance of the relationship. And I think that is one of the things that we can do. In addition to legislation, those of us who have been outspoken about the situation, we need to keep talking about it. One of the things that some of you may have seen Senator Tillis in his speech on the floor of the Senate talking about how stupid it was that the administration is talking about this. And when we were in the meeting with your Prime Minister, he said, I'm going to go to the floor every week and I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to try and get other Republicans to do that. And I think continuing to speak out, continuing to push legislation, continuing to raise the issue is really important for all of us to do, not just as elected officials, but other people who have interests in what's going on in world affairs. In New Hampshire, we have something called the Council of World Affairs. And looking at those organizations, those NGOs that have a stake in the international world order and trying to get them to also weigh in on what's happening as a result of this rhetoric, I think is important.
Thank you. I have a question here in the front. And here to start with, thank you.
We got to get this woman here too.
Yeah, we will go to afterwards. I have spotted them. Yeah, yes, very good.
Stephen Grant from the Danish Broadcasting. Senator Shaheen, what's your time frame for this conflict? How far do you think it will go? Will it be done by a midterm election before that? Or will this be something which will continue with the President's attempts to annex Greenland?
Thank you very much. Up here.
My name is Anna Bunmimakova. I have previously worked in California. Currently, I work at the Danish Technical University. I have written.
Do you teach? Are you a teacher?
I'm not a teacher. I work with researchers to help them work with public authorities on deep technology development and innovation. Given the recent developments, how do you see these changes affecting the scientific community, both in terms of research freedom and international collaborations? We do have a lot of research collaborations with the US, as you all know, especially also in Greenland.
Thank you. Excellent. Another question here in the front. Do we have a microphone on the way? Yeah. Hey, excuse me. Here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time to see us. I'm head of studies, a small collaborative engineering program between the Technical University of Denmark and the government of Greenland. So this question is slightly on a more personal note. I mean, it takes part half of it in Greenland, and at present I have students, both Danish and Greenlandic students, very concerned about the situation now. I'm very concerned about the situation, sending teachers. What would your word be to them?
First of all, how long do we think Donald Trump may be focused on this? I have no idea. You know, who knows what Donald Trump is going to do. But I do think, as I said, as we get into the election season, which has already started in the United States, there are a lot of primaries that are happening in the next couple of months, that there will be more and more focus on to use Tom Tillis's words, the stupidity of what's being proposed by the president, and that's helpful. You know, I am very distressed, as are a lot of scientists in the United States, about what this administration is doing to science and research. All you have to do is look at Robert Kennedy, who's the head of our Department of Health and Human Services, and his vaccine denials to know that there are real issues that are being created in the scientific community right now. And the failure to fund so many, particularly medical research. In New Hampshire, we have something called Dartmouth Health, that is our health system in my state, that is known throughout the United States. And of course, I'm only about an hour from Boston, which has one of the most impressive medical communities in the United States. And to see what's happening to research for science and technology. Again, it's not just a problem for the United States. It's a problem as we think about what is not going to get done over the next 3 years during this administration, the problems we are not going to solve because of the failure to fund science and technology. So it's very disturbing, and there's a lot of concern about it in the United States. And my message to your students is continue your work. It's important. It's important for what they're doing, it's important for their futures, and it's important for the long-term relationship. You know, one of the things that struck me as we were meeting with the Danish ambassador and the Greenlandic ambassadors was when the ambassador from Greenland said, you know, we share the same values. You know, it's not like we're talking about a country that we have no understanding of, that we have no history with. We've been on the same side, and we need to continue to encourage that.
The impact on science, if I can add, is not only within the US. We have many that are affected in various ways, also in the disciplines of political science or across the board, in fact. And I think that, you know, we will also do our bit to speak up about academic freedom and be very explicit about that. We are already at the university here, but it's also something we are learning as this unfolds, to see how we need to protect and show that as a value that requires work. If I may take us to a very different perspective, and then perhaps we can take a last round of questions. But I do think that currently you have mentioned a couple of times in your intervention to start with that, of course, this plays the uncertainty, the disruption, the bold moves and the unpredictability plays directly into the hands of powers elsewhere that we can only see this being to their advantage. Having worked in foreign policy for such a long time and being in the position you are today, how do you see the balance and what do you expect from China and from Russia in this situation?
Well, I think it emboldens them, without a doubt. You know, one of the reasons the administration gave for going into Venezuela was the foothold that China and Russia and Iran have had in Venezuela, which is absolutely correct. And they have used Venezuela as an operating base to expand influence throughout Latin America. But on the one hand, yes, President Trump and the administration said, we're doing this because we're worried about that influence. And on the other hand, he goes out and makes those statements about Denmark and Greenland that totally undermines the relationship in a way that empowers Putin and Xi. So I think it's very dangerous. We are very concerned. One of the things that the minority in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has done since the Trump administration took over is to put out a report on what the elimination of USAID, which was our foreign assistance program, has meant in terms of empowering China around the world. The effort to withdraw the United States from multiple international organizations, whether the effort to reduce influence at the UN. Now, I will say, and when we were talking about checks and balances, one of the positive things that's happening is that as members of Congress, we put back a lot of the money for those organizations, the dues that we owe the UN, as an effort to say, this is the policy we want, not the policy of the Trump administration. But there are real ramifications in terms of empowering China. I think what happens in Ukraine is going to have a significant impact on what happens with Russia. I think the best, in my mind, the best way to deal with China and Xi is to defeat Putin in Ukraine, because that puts a brakes on what China's thinking about, and it also would have a significant impact on Russia as Russia's looking at the Arctic and expanding influence in places. So I've been arguing for that, for more support for Ukraine, for long-range weapons during the Biden administration, actually going all the way back to Obama when Ukraine first invaded Crimea. The fact that we were not willing to give them lethal weapons, I thought was a real mistake. And it was a mistake, actually that was a mistake not just of the United States, but of Europe. So I think we've got to recognize that there is a connection between all of these things. And I haven't talked to one intelligence person or one member of the military who hasn't said that China is watching what happens in Ukraine, and that if Putin is successful there, that empowers Xi to think about going into Taiwan and other expansionist interests that they have. So it's important for all of us to recognize those connections.
So certainly not an end game that we are in with the question of Greenland. It's potentially just a beginning. I will take more questions from the audience. Yeah. I'm sorry to make you run up and down a bit, but I would like to take some of our students. Yeah.
Hi, I'm studying political science here at the university, and I'm also a worker at the rector's office. So I do quite a bit of my time here at the university. I feel that the entire scene involving Trump, Vance, and Zelensky was the first major shock from this time's Trump administration to the world order as we knew it. And then there's this whole situation with Greenland, which I also see as a potential breaking point within the Republican Party. You, as a Democrat, do you sense a growing divide inside the Republican Party between those who support NATO and Europe and those who are more critical of these alliances? And do you think this internal divide could shape Trump's administration and actions going forward, potentially actually pushing him to pull back from this line against Greenland?
Thank you. We'll take one more over here and then come to you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Gustav. I'm also a political science student at the university. Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for being here. My question is primarily about how we rebuild the trust between the American and Danish society, because I hope in some way soon that we can move past this. How do you see that we can keep these bilateral ties open in the future? Thank you.
And we have the last question here.
Hi, Senator Jeanne. My name is Adam. I'm an engineering student at the Technical University, and I want to ask you a question about the armed forces of the United States. You talked about it in the end, but I know that the officers of the United States Armed Forces swear an oath to the Constitution. Do you have any idea of the sentiment in the armed forces regarding all of this situation, both Venezuela, Greenland, and so on? Thank you.
So to start with the divide in the Republican Party, what I think shapes the president's actions probably more than that right now is public opinion. And, you know, it's a democracy, like Denmark is a democracy. I spent some time teaching at I didn't teach, but I was the head of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School at Harvard for a while. And one of the things I used to say to students is, I think democracy works. Doesn't always work the way I want it to. And that's one of the challenges in a democracy. But I do think that this White House is looking at the polls, and they're seeing that the American people are not happy. So to what extent will more of my Republican colleagues be willing to stand up and say they disagree with the president? It's not clear, but we are seeing some breaks in the united front. Last week, the House, one of the fights we've been having, and we had a government shutdown that went on for a very long time, the longest in history, and it was over whether we were going to continue to help people pay for the cost of health insurance. Healthcare is a big issue in the United States. And one of the things that happened last week is that 17 Republicans joined the Democrats in our House with something called a discharge petition to pass an extension of help for people who were losing their health insurance. We had 5 Republicans join us in passing a war powers resolution last week. Now, 2 of them flipped under pressure this week, but it shows that we're beginning to see some divides that are affecting people because, as I said, we've got midterm elections this year, and conventional wisdom is that Democrats are much more likely to take the House than Republicans. And so that gives people in the Republican Party pause, and they're looking at what people are concerned about. very carefully. I think we've all got to work at rebuilding trust. You know, that's one reason I'm here. It's one reason our delegation is here, because we're concerned about what's happening as the result of the president's rhetoric. And we want to say very directly to you in Denmark, to you in Greenland, we think this relationship is really important, and that's why we're here. And we got to think about other ways to continue to do that. I think as young people, you're really important in that. One of the things that distresses me about the changes to foreign assistance in the United States is that so many of the exchange programs have been defunded by the administration. Now we're trying to put some of that money back in, but that's one of the best ways to encourage relationships going forward, is getting to know each other. I'm a big fan. I don't know if any of you have participated or you know anything about FIRST robotics competition. Is anybody here part of, it's a global effort to get young people engaged in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math. And it started in New Hampshire with an entrepreneur named Dean Kamen, who invented the insulin pump and the Segway. Some of you, particularly you science and technology students, may have heard of Dean. But the idea is, how do we get kids as excited about STEM subjects as they are about sports? So it's this game. And now it's gone global. There's a global competition, and students from countries all over the world send teams, and they compete. This year it's going to be in South Korea. Last year it was in Greece. But what better way to rebuild trust and relationships than for people to get to know each other? So I understand that this is not going to happen overnight, because once that trust is broken, it takes a while to rebuild it. But it's on all of us to help do that. The final question was about sentiment. That's all I wrote down. What was the rest of that question?
The sentiment in the armed forces of the United States.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, I think one of the things that makes the American military, like the militaries in most democracies, so strong is that it's taken out of the political arena. One of the real concerns I have right now as a member of the Armed Services Committee is that this administration has fired a number of generals who, for various reasons, most of them don't have to do with policy. Most of them have to do with their misplaced effort to erase DEI. Have you followed this? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think it's really important that we keep our military apolitical. They should not be involved in partisan politics. So there is, if you talk to people who have retired, if you talk to people who are not on active duty right now, I think there's a lot of concern about some of the policies, but it's not something that the military talks about.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen. I'm afraid we are running out of time, and it's a busy schedule you have while you're in Copenhagen. We've covered a lot of ground here, but I think what I take from you in particular is this emphasis on how the politics and the diplomacy needs to run on different levels as well as in different strings regarding both the international organizations but also the soft diplomacy of people to people and societies and all that we do have in common.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time with us today, and thank you to all of us for being here. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope it has been productive for you to be in Copenhagen and to bring back some messages to the US. We hope that both on the short and the medium, and certainly also on the long term, after midterm elections, we are in a place where we all collaborate and still see each other in the good ways that we always have with the US. Thank you for being here.
Yes, that's my hope as well. Thank you all very much.
Geopolitics organizing this. So thank you so much for coming.
It's nice to see you.
Yeah, I mean it's the issue of the day, so they will show up. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Still, if I can help.